Okay. So, hi everyone, we'll be with you in about 5 minutes. We're just going to let everyone join the live stream because we're a couple of minutes early. So talk amongst yourselves or let us know in the comments section where you're watching from, and I'll chat to the people who are leaving comments now, and then we'll be with Tim in a couple of minutes. So it's dead on 5 o'clock.
Good.
Shall we start dead on 5 o'clock, Tim?
Let's do that.
Yeah. And if you're watching on replay, don't worry if you missed anything. You'll still be able to come back and leave us comments in the comments section of this live stream. But for all our live viewers, hello, I'm Ashley Capaldi. I do social media and digital content at Cambridge Assessment. And this is Tim Oates. So you're the director of our Assessment, Research and Development Division.
That's right.
That's the one.
That's
the one.
Right.
So we're here today to talk about GCSEs. They've been in the news quite a lot, so I've been seeing them on social media, people discussing whether we still need them for various reasons. And the debate kind of has changed over the last few years with new reasons or ideas popping up. So first of all, to get the other question out of the way, there's been a lot of talk in the UK that we're an anomaly for testing our 16-year-olds, but you've got evidence to the contrary, don't you?
Yeah, so GCSE has been with us for a while, and it replaced principally O Levels and CSEs at the time that needed harmonising. And they were introduced around about the time of just before the national curriculum was implemented in this country. So they've been a relatively long-lived qualification, and actually international organisations have often looked to the UK to say, it was impressive to introduce a qualification which could service the needs of all students in schools. So we shouldn't underestimate the extent to which it's been a policy success. The question of, well, are they still needed, has arisen a number of times over the past decade or so, not least because people have thought it right that we review our qualification offer. But it's been particularly revisited in the light of the raising of the school leaving age effectively.
So now people stay till 18.
Yeah, and there are many routes which people take in upper secondary and beyond. But essentially, most people now are encouraged to stay on in educational training for much longer than they were a couple of decades ago. So that's made the question seem much more important. You asked, do we stand out in retaining an examination or a set of examination at 16, a formal summative assessment at 16? And most people look around and say, have other countries got high stakes examinations? But that's actually the wrong question. Have other countries got high stakes assessment at the age of 16? If you ask that question, not examinations, but assessments, then you get a very different answer. And we looked at that systematically through a research exercise. And we produced a report. Jill Elliott did a very good report with a rather odd title, but whether GCSE is a red herring. It's available on our website.
Okay, I'll find you the link and I'll post it in this chat while you're talking, Tim.
Thank you very much indeed. That's good. And really, that research systematically uncovered something which those of us who've been doing international comparisons for many years knew all along, which is the majority of high-quality systems and improving systems have high-stakes assessment at the age of 16. Now, they're not always formal examinations like GCSE. Frequently, it's teacher assessment. But if you talk to people in those systems, they're very uncomfortable that it's not being run through external tests. They feel that often teacher assessment is not as dependable as an external state assessment. They often talk about unfairness, lack of consistency in the standards, and so on. So if you ask the right question, we begin to look actually rather typical of high quality systems. And in fact, you can almost turn it the other way around. that other systems are looking to us to establish consistent assessment at the age of 16.
Okay, so it's the difference between the finite difference between assessment and examinations, and maybe that's the question that's getting confused, do you think?
Yeah, I think people, by asking the wrong question, miss the alignment between our own system and other high quality and improving systems.
Okay, and you did another piece of work called Who's the Most Tested One of All, and I'll pop that link in the chat now for you. So that was debunking the myth that we're the most tested nation in the world, which we being the UK, and that's where we're sat right now, often have a reputation for being, and you found evidence to the contrary for that. So moving on, the other question is perhaps the more recent conversations about wanting to scrap GCSEs or suggesting GCSEs are no longer useful. Do you think that might be getting conflated with the quite correct new focus or more intense focus on the need for vocational education and wanting to bring that up to speed and give it parity with traditional exams?
Yeah, I think that's right. There are three things in that I'd like to cover through this particular online session, and that's certainly one of them. And so the other, actually, we should look at GCSEs being part of a system. You've got to look at what comes before them and what comes after them and how they enable that. That's really important. And then the third point is kind of the key problems that we actually face in our system and whether removing GCSE is a remedy to those very pressing problems. So the vocational route, very, very important question. Now, if we go back to 1981, there was something called the New Training Initiative, and that had three objectives, and it attempted to reform apprenticeship, adult training, and youth training. And really since then, we haven't done well at establishing a high-quality mass participation vocational route.
So that was 1981 the last time
1981.
Okay.
We've had and Hilary Steedman from the LSE, Howard Gospel, Lorna Unwin, and other, and Ewart Keep, key analysts in the area of vocational provision. We all agree. We've done, again, wide-ranging domestic and international analysis, but we think England has not had a good policy remedy to opening up this high-quality mass participation route. We're trying again with the apprenticeship levy, with widening the meaning of apprenticeship, really supporting it through fiscal measures like the levy, introducing T-levels to make sure there's general education, technical route. But we shouldn't kid ourselves. We haven't done well at opening up a high-status, high-participation route. And because we've had numerous attempts, I think there's a kind of an air of desperation about it. I certainly believe we have to put our shoulders behind the existing policy on apprenticeship, the existing policy on T-levels, and really make it work this time around. I personally don't see abolishing GCSEs as a means of really levering policy. When often people cite Germany, it's a good example of high-quality post-16 vocational education. There are other examples which give us real pause for thought. Switzerland, for example, has a kind of version of the German system, but the quite surprising outcome there, a very stable system that was established well and has been very long-lived, is that the returns on vocational education in Switzerland are higher to those that have done the vocational route than the academic. Those that have gone on the academic route only catch up round about the age of 51, 52. They've really done a good job.
So you mean economic returns?
Yeah, that's right, in terms of earning more.
Yeah.
And the thing which differentiates our own system from particularly the Swiss system is that employers are highly involved and highly committed to the provision of youth training. And that's the thing that we've really found difficult to crack in this country, hence the levy.
Yeah. So that's the next question I was going to ask you. There's another option. We could broaden the GCSE offering, and that's what I think you're saying, bringing vocational subjects into it or a vocational element to broaden the GCSE offering and give it parity with traditional education. So we've mentioned the levy. So how can we do that for GCSEs? I think the CBI was involved in some of the more recent discussions, and giving their opinions on why GCSEs as they are not delivering what employers might want. So what other kind of things can we do, or what can we try and do better or more of to make GCSEs fit for purpose if they're not already?
Well, we need young people engaged and motivated in school. So we need the full qualifications offer, which enables them to feel that school and the programmes are meaningful for them. I think there was a correct policy response in 2010 to look at the full range of GCSE equivalents, because in some cases, as Amanda Spielman said, they were being used to game the performance tables. We have evidence of that.
Yeah.
It wasn't solely the pupils choosing them to ensure that they had the kind of engaging programmes that were needed. But sometimes when you rationalise a catalogue, you have to squeeze it, and we need to continue to look at it to see that there are routes for all pupils, all ages, and all needs within our qualifications catalogue. But I want to deal with this issue of employer organisations saying that qualifications are right or wrong. We have to look at that, because sometimes it's rhetoric, because what is said doesn't really correspond to the evidence. Well, what evidence? The answer is returns evidence.
Yeah.
What I look at particularly is not necessarily what employer organisations say. I look at what the employers are actually paying for. And we continue to have a gross shortage in the labour market in respect of mathematical skills, in terms of scientific skills, and we have labour shortages in areas like engineering. Now, those are provided by existing GCSEs. It's just not enough people are pursuing them in post-compulsory education and on into sub-degree and degree level qualifications. If people do pursue them and continue to progress into them to higher levels of qualification, they earn more in the labour market. The existing qualifications do provide the skills and knowledge, application, critical thinking, which employers pay for. So it's more a question of making the programmes attractive and to encourage, particularly, say, for example, girls and females to study more science options like physics and to pursue them to a higher level.
And I think it was probably you, I normally get all my news from you, saying that we need to start that process much earlier so we can see groups like girls and other types of students being turned off those subjects much, much earlier than you'd think they would be. So way before they decide what GCSEs they're going to sit. It's in primary school, they've been maybe siloed off into a group who doesn't do maths or will not respond to technical education. You're better at things like English and languages and stuff like that.
Well, it's absolutely right to look at where gendered views of occupations and subjects begin to cut into young people's perceptions, and to look at it, as you say, over the totality of schooling and into the labour market. What we find is that very young children come to schools with very gendered views of occupations. Interestingly enough, primary school and early secondary school does quite a good job at attenuating those gendered views. But I'm afraid these gendered views cut back in again when boys and girls make their GCSE option choices. And that's often because they again get influenced by other views from outside school as to what they should be doing.
And if you lose skills like early math skills, you're going to really struggle trying to sit a GCSE or an A-level course in something like physics if you haven't had the build-up. That's the problem. Hi, by the way, to Noreen watching in Pakistan. Wherever you're watching from around the world, if you leave a comment, let us know what you think. You can put questions to Tim even after we finish the video, and he'll come back and answer them for you. And let us know what it looks like around the age of 16 and post-16 in your country as well. So do you sit formal exams? Do you think what your country's doing is working or not? And to broaden out the conversation even wider, A-levels have been brought into this as well. So I think the most recent discussion around whether GCSEs are still fit for purpose was part of a wider discussion about we need to revamp A-levels and GCSEs all together and come up with one huge thing that happens at the age of 18 rather than anything else in the lead up to that. So what's the unique function, do you think, that GCSEs perform separately to A level? So we still need this to happen at the age of 16 before we go on and do that at the age of 18.
Okay. So we do look around the world and try to understand the performance of education arrangements. And we do have to look at countries' systems as systems. And we need to apply that same discipline to how we view our own. So we can't just look at GCSEs in isolation. We can't look at A levels in isolation. It really is wrong to do that. So let's just examine this question. We should get rid of GCSEs. It would resolve an awful lot of problems in our system. Okay. Why do we have GCSEs? For many subjects, it will be the point at which a pupil will start studying a particular subject. For example, geography. They may not continue it into upper secondary, into A levels or equivalents. Well, do we not need to give them a good testimonial which they can take out into the world, which is a dependable account of what they have learned and what they can do? I believe it is.
Mm-hmm.
So at the moment we have an education system in which certain subjects are no longer studied and children make choices. What's interesting, when I interview young people, when they make those choices and enter upper secondary, many people are really, really pleased to be able to focus on the subjects which really excite them and motivate them. And that's good, because we've taken liberty away from them. We say they have to be in school. Mm-hmm. And so when they study, it's worthwhile they study things that they really like studying, because they will learn maximally when they're studying, and that's good for them, it's good for society, and it's good for the economy. So GCSEs are necessary because people stop studying subjects. We have 3 to 4 subjects studied in upper secondary, typically A levels, only 3 or 4. That is somewhat of a contrast with countries like Germany or Finland. But one of the reasons we study 3 and 4 is that children and people can acquire highly specialist knowledge. They can pursue things in depth. Now that, in turn, allows us to have 3-year first degrees, unlike many countries. And those 3-year degrees, I don't think it's overstating it to say they're the envy of the world. Many people come here to study because they have short duration degrees, which are incredibly intensive and of extraordinarily high standing and of high standard. Well, who pays for them?
Yeah.
If we had a much broader diet, if people had to study a much broader range of subjects during 16 to 19, we would probably need 4-year, or in some cases 5-year degrees. Now, who pays for those? That would be families. That would be individuals in this country. Now, that would be the consequence, I think, of saying that GCSEs should be withdrawn in their entirety from the system, and that we should really broaden 16 to 19 education. Now, there are a couple of caveats, and I'll just state them now. I think Alison Wolfe said many years ago that there should be some way of encouraging people to continue to study a degree of mathematics in 16 to 19, and possibly a foreign language. We've got plenty.
There was the report, the Wolfson report. I'll drop that into the comments for you.
So there's plenty of room within existing A-level programs to have that kind of enrichment study. Also important to look at countries like Germany and Finland. So Germany has its Abitur, and people say, oh, well, look, it's much, much broader than A-level programs. And, we therefore should get rid of A-levels. I've looked in great detail at the Abitur in Germany. I've had a lot of interviews with students, and indeed asked the students to look at A-levels in this country. What they said is very interesting. In Germany, you study up to 14 subjects, but as you begin to get to the end of your program, you focus on 3 or 4 and take formal examinations only in 3 or 4 subjects. And that's the same is true of Finland. And those examinations look exactly like A levels. So it's not the A levels that are the problem. It's how we see the curriculum, 16 to 19, and saying we should replace A levels with some kind of holistic baccalaureate just doesn't do the trick of giving the small units of enrichment that the evidence says we need.
And that's maybe especially obvious with things like English and maths and those other key skills. So swathes of students do not wish to or feel they don't have the skills for whatever reason. I counted myself among one of those to take on something like maths up to A level. But even in my own job hunting post-degree, I'm still asked for C's in GCSE maths and English, and that was our standard. So I don't need an A level of maths understanding, but I need that GCSE numeracy. You can handle this amount of maths, even though I'm going into an humanities degree. So I don't think we can afford to lose that at the very basic level, can we? The key skills of maths and English, you need this certificate to say you can do that at that level, which is currently the GCSE level, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we need to make sure that our A levels contain the mathematics, communication skills, and other that taking that subject on in higher education requires. But of course, there are some subjects that people will take in as a degree or attracted to take as a degree, which they may not have taken at A level. So people who do French, history, and music may want to study psychology. That they will have needed to have continued with mathematics, and at the moment there's no good provision for them to do that. But we can make this available through the qualifications catalogue without throwing the entire structure of GCSEs and A levels up in the air, with all of the collateral disruption and cost and disturbance that involves. So that brings me to my second area that I wanted to raise, really, which is that what are the problems that we face in our education system, and will removing GCSEs be an immediate remedy and an economic and effective remedy to those problems? Well, we had a very good lecture from Bill Schmidt here, and it's on our website.
I'll drop that for you now.
and what are the problems that the big transnational surveys, PISA, PIMS and PIRLS, tell us that we have about our education system? Well, we've got a lot of between school variation in quality right the way through the education system. We've got a lot of within school variation in quality at all ages right the way through. We've got high impacted social background on attainment all the way through. We've got education adding inequality to existing social inequality. I don't see that removing GCSEs, which is costly and disruptive, deals with any of those problems. And those are major, serious problems that if we tackle, then we would raise attainment and improve equity and give children the kind of skills and knowledge which is what needed in the labour market. What about the quality of early years provision? What about the problems of primary, secondary transition? What about the problem of the wilderness years of Key Stage 3? None of those are resolved by withdrawing GCSE.
So the wilderness years, it means that you're sort of given over to gearing up for GCSEs and you don't have good quality Key Stage 3 education. It's kind of can be seen as an exam factory and we're missing what those years should be.
Well, no, not quite. The problem with Key Stage 3 is that as Ofsted identified in their report, the wilderness years, a lot of attention has been paid to Key Stage 4 GCSE programmes, and there's been relative curriculum neglect of Key Stage 3.
Right.
And that's something that Ofsted is really addressing in its focus on increasing the curriculum focus of inspection.
So Key Stage 3 here for us is years 7 and 8 and 9.
That's really important. Then there's another couple of issues. So it's true that around GCSEs there are issues of stress and often the stress we transfer onto pupils because of schools being anxious about performance tables. There are issues of option choices and subject choices, and some schools not having timetables which enable children to study subjects in GCSE that they want to. We know that 3-year Key Stage 4 means children ending subjects early. We've discussed the status of vocational education right at the beginning. But all of those issues associated with GCSE choices, I agree, but all of those issues have faster, better remedies than simply getting rid of GCSE. And I think, again, Ofsted will be looking at that in their curriculum reviews, which they're just about to embark on.
And hyper accountability is something you've spoken about a lot before. So again, we were thinking earlier on whether maybe the get rid of GCSEs conversation is in reaction to a lack of parity for vocational qualifications.
Yeah.
And then do you think this exam stress conversation is coming into that as well? So we're seeing, we think we're seeing, it's definitely been reported that there's this new generation of children who are stressed in a different way because of exams when we know we've always had exams. You've got evidence for that as well. So is maybe the question about getting rid of GCSEs a knee-jerk reaction and thinking that's going to fix all of the stress around exams, when you would argue that's probably the hyper accountability of exam results and using exam results in that way that's really the issue?
There's a lot of constructed stress and a lot of stress which is transferred onto young children because of institutions being worried about their performance.
Yeah.
We know that with schools that are struggling, and when we look at their curricula and look at what happens when more effective schools could support these other schools. So that's an important area. But in talking about stress, we've looked at that in a very thorough way. A little bit of stress improves your performance. A little bit of stress incentivizes you. Pressure incentivizes you to do things that you wouldn't otherwise have done. Pressure incentivizes you to study things that don't necessarily agree with your common sense, but actually are fundamental to subject disciplines to understand. So a little bit of functional stress is a very, very good idea. We know that the most stressful thing is going into an examination not having been taught properly and not actually knowing the stuff. We've interviewed pupils who actually approach examinations in a very positive way, an opportunity to demonstrate what they know. And that occurs in England and it occurs in other systems around the world too. It's also not England that's uniquely concerned about the stress being placed upon children. So a lot of Nordic countries are worried about this, with Nordic countries having a very high rate of teenage suicide, for example. They're very worried about the kind of pressures which are occurring on youth identity, which people attribute to education, but are really arising through other social processes. Now, so we're not the only country that is experiencing a recognition that stress is increasing amongst young people. If we recognize the complex sources of this stress, we would immediately recognize that actually just removing qualifications at the age of 16 won't actually deal with the sources, the genuine sources of many of these forms of stress which young children are experiencing.
And it might just backload it onto the 18-year-old exams, mightn't it? Because we don't have the gap in the middle. So I've got this set of GCSEs and then I can go on and do my A Levels. You're going to be sort of ramping up to this huge, scary event at the end of your education, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, in interviewing young people, one of the things they say is actually one source of stress, not the sole source of stress, but one source of stress is removed from education by them being able to make choices and move to studying subjects that they particularly enjoy and are particularly engaged with, and are surrounded by children who similarly want to study the subject and therefore apply, and perhaps low-level disruptive behaviour is less in those groups.
So we'll come offline when we finish the live video, and even if you're watching on replay, do keep typing your questions in the comments box and Tim can come back and answer them as and when. But so your final thought on this would be GCSEs still might need revising in terms of content and the specifics of how we deliver them, but they are useful in a huge mixed bag of what we deliver as part of age 4 up to age 18 and beyond education.
We have to see them in a systemic context. They have a particular purpose in our system, and we can do certain things in upper secondary and particularly in higher education because we have A Levels and because we have GCSEs And GCSEs and A Levels are really not that out of step with the majority of high-performing systems around the world. There's one really important issue we haven't touched on, and that's to do with some of the statements which are being made around this in terms of increasing school autonomy.
Right.
Now, the national curriculum is quite specific in primary in England, and it's quite a bit more vague if you look at the specifications in Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4. Now, it's vaguer because we have GCSEs. They provide the programme content. They provide the clear statement of standards, which is essential for an education system on which employers can depend and society can depend that young children are learning key content. It's an entitlement, as well as providing things which are needed in the economy and society. Without making those kind of demands, by the way, without laying down those standards, we see gaps opening up between social groups. And that inequality is very problematic for society and for the people who are not achieving necessary skills and knowledge. Now, if we remove GCSEs, all the evidence is that we would have to increase the restriction that comes from a framework of national standards. And the instrument that we would have, the only instrument we would have available, is the national curriculum. Now, at the moment, not all schools that do GCSEs have to follow the national curriculum.
So what schools would they be, just in case we have outside of the UK?
For example,
right?
Aren't legally obliged to follow the national curriculum.
So academy schools are free from local authority control. So we'd call that LA, which means the government. Yeah.
And but they do undertake national examinations to make sure that young people have access to the necessary skills and knowledge. Now, we would be really running in the absolute reverse direction to all developed and improving systems by relaxing the national requirements on schools to that degree. People don't realise that in Finland, there's a national curriculum. They talk about the high autonomy of schools, but nobody recognises that the state actually tells schools in Finland how many hours that they should teach each subject for. Now, that's a form of restriction we don't place on schools in England. So, which is the more autonomous nation? You know, when you get down to the facts, there are real issues about just removing national standards from Key Stage 4, from 16-year-olds. If we took out GCSEs, we would have to have statements of national standards. Why have to? Countries like Sweden. So if you look at the evidence on Sweden, great deal of autonomy on schools, new forms of schools, free schools introduced, teacher assessment at key ages, and what happened was massive grade inflation. So over the last 20 years, what we've seen is a massive increase in children achieving the higher grades, but in the international surveys, the standards crashing. And the Swedes are themselves engaged in a really anxious debate about this. They're talking about how on earth they can re-establish standards in schools so that equity issues are not threatened, that attainment issues are not threatened. If we want to raise attainment and improve equity, close the gap in attainment between social groups, you have to have clear national standards for each stage of education. So if we were to remove GCSEs, which are the statement of national standards by which we judge the quality of education, we would need a policy instrument to assert those standards. We'd have to have something. The most obvious thing is the national curriculum. We would have to completely revise the national curriculum, make it much more detailed at the age of 16, and introduce a means of assessing it to make sure that the standards were being achieved. Otherwise, parents would have no recourse to anything which would tell them about the standard of education that are being achieved in the schools to which they send their young children.
And we'd have no way to check that schools and teachers were doing their jobs, would they? And until they sit their 18-year-old exams, and then it's too late for the people that have just taken their exams at the age of 18 to check whether they were being taught properly throughout their schooling, I suppose.
Well, that's right. And again, in Finland, talking about people say, well, there's no national tests, there are no national inspections. But if parents are concerned about the standards being achieved in a school in Finland, that will trigger an investigation by the municipality. And the municipality will look at all of the teacher assessment data and the use of external commercial standardized tests and tests available from teacher unions and so on to see what standards the children are actually achieving in that school. There's very high accountability in Finland. It just assumes a different form.
It just looks different.
It just looks different.
If you're not aware of Tim's work on Finland, you can just type Finland or Finnish into the Cambridge Assessment website, and lots of work from Tim will pop up for you. And the basics is, we've been looking at what they did with their system about 20 years ago and thinking that's happening now, and that's not quite it. No, in a very small nutshell. But right. Do go back in and look at some of the work Tim's done across Finland, because you've been leading the conversation there as well, haven't you? So before we wrap up then, where do you think this conversation's come from? Are we wrong in thinking it's a brand new thing? I think you said right at the beginning of the video, this has been rumbling on for maybe 10 years. So was there ever a time where people were backing GCSEs back when they were invented? Was it the 1981, did you say?
It was during the 1980s when they were conceived, and then they were introduced just prior to the national curriculum.
So what's changed then? Why are we here now? Are people just wanting to change something and GCSEs are in their firing line? Or do you think it's the vocational education? Do you think it's the exam stress? Or are we all just at a point where all these things have come to a head?
Well, I think all those questions are being raised. When you look at the debate that's even been occurring today, people are joining that debate with very different agenda.
Right.
And some of them, they're concerned about all of the issues that you just listed very accurately. I think it's important to continue to debate the purpose of qualifications. And it's important to recognise that GCSEs have changed a lot since they were introduced. There's been a constant review of them and constant modification of the catalogue.
We just had a load
subjects, balance of assessment, grading systems. It's been held under constant review. That's been a good thing. So I think it's important to constantly debate the purpose of, or to periodically debate the purpose of qualifications and check that they're meeting the needs of individuals, families, the education system, the economy and society. You know, there are those different purposes in mind. But I think in terms of the problems that people are citing, and indeed the pressing problems that come out of systematic analysis of our education system, I hope I've made it clear that just removing GCSEs and calling for a new form of qualification, that's not going to be the most effective remedy to many of the problems which people are saying need a solution. I think many of those could be solved much more rapidly, in a much more effective way, and a much less disruptive way, by looking at other aspects of our education system.
Excellent. So thanks, Tim, by the way. Even when we come off this live video, like I said, you'll still be able to leave your comments. Even if you didn't join us live and you're watching on replay, please do leave comments and ask questions, and we'll have Tim come back and answer as many of them as possible. This will sit on our Facebook page forever, and like you said, let's continue to debate the issues. And when we finish this live video, I'll go back and put in the rest of the research that Tim mentioned that I didn't have time to find while I was trying to talk to you. But thank you very much, Tim, and I hope this is the beginning of, well, a continuation of the debate about why we still need GCSEs within our curriculum and with our whole education system. So thanks very much for joining us today, and thank you to everyone who watched and is watching on replay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.